I really don't want to do this morning, like a lot.
I used to hear a simple song. That was until you came along. Now in its place is something new. I hear it when I look at you.
Record. So, as many of my channel supporters will know, last week I finally got around to doing the full 1 hour FTP test outside. So I'm about to start an hour of flogging, and I got to tell you, that is riding balls out for 1 hour to determine what is known as your functional threshold power, or put more simply, how many watts I could hold on a bike for roughly an hour. My average for the hour was 363 watts. Now I did this test off the back of another test I did a week prior on the Sufferfest indoor training app. And that test is called the Half Monty, which is a more practical and simple way of determining your FTP through what is a ramp component to failure, followed by a moderate sustained effort. Now, rightfully so, after that comparison between the Half Monty and the full 1 hour test outdoors, which was well within a 5% accuracy range, I did have some pointers come through from you, the audience, about the fact that one test was inside and the other one was outside, and the other point being that during the indoor test, I used the power meter from the Wahoo Kickr as the ramp ideally requires erg mode. And for outside, I use the power meter on the BMC Teammachine, which is a Quark power meter, so two separate power meters. So I thought there was a missing piece to the puzzle, an opportunity for one more test, one more video, and that is putting myself on the smart trainer in front of a brick wall, just so there's no arguments about the difficulty of indoor riding versus outdoors, and I'll measure power through both the Wahoo Kickr and also my Quark power meter so we can compare. With both the Wahoo Kickr and the Quark power meter fully calibrated, of course. Now, a couple of things before we get into the footage. Number one, I was setting up the night before this test was to be completed because I wanted to ensure when I got up I could just get straight into it, and it was a bizarre experience because I actually felt like I was setting up for a self-execution. Like scenes out of Green Mile, that movie where they role play the execution the day prior. I was setting up cords, stools, getting fans ready, and I was fearful and really nervous about what was to come. You know that really famous saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? Well, I feel like that should apply to this video. Obviously, I've published it, and it's an interesting experiment, so watch it, but please never come back and watch this video again. What happened out there in front of the brick wall by my backyard pool, it stays out there because this test was the worst thing I have ever done to myself in my entire life, and shit got really weird. I'm still trying to figure out what actually happened to my heart rate. Could it be real? Because I'm questioning whether it could have been. But then I consider how much pain and suffering I was going through, so maybe it was real. Also, I'm going to apologize up front. I got super overheated during this test, and I had to take my jersey off, and given the fact that I've stacked on a few kilos thanks to too many of these, and I'm even pastier than normal given the fact that we're headed into winter here in Australia. So things aren't a good look in this video today, but the overheating aspect, we're certainly going to be talking more about that in the commentary. The second thing I wanted to share with you before I show you this footage is that, you know that other famous saying, you wouldn't bloody read about it. Or you wouldn't read about it, maybe that's the Aussie way of saying it. Well, literally with 2 minutes to go out of this 60-minute test, the trainer dropped out and I was absolutely furious. Fuck! I had actually flogged myself to the extreme for 58 minutes and then the power shut down. And while the vast majority of you who watch my content are absolute legends, I know there will be 1 or 2 random units who come and watch this video and say, I made the whole thing up. I could not handle the final 2 minutes. So let me just say up front, you do not give up a 60-minute test with 2 minutes to go. You give up at 10 minutes, 20 minutes, heck, maybe even 50 minutes. I feel like giving up so many times in this test today, but not with 2 minutes to go. In fact, I reflected later that day and I was thankful. If the trainer was going to drop out, at least it did it at close to 60 minutes as possible. Because if it dropped out at 40 minutes or 50 minutes, I probably couldn't have published this video because no one would have ever given me the benefit of the doubt about the full hour. So I'm thankful because I will never, ever do this test again. So let's get into the footage.
So let's break this video into 4 main parts. Number 1, we'll talk about the settings. So why the brick wall, why no erg mode, etc. Number 2, how I found this test compared to riding balls out outdoors for the hour. And number 3, my heart rate numbers, which were extreme. And last of all, we'll finish off with the data comparisons, comparing data from the test I did outside versus the half Monty versus this ridiculous test on the trainer. Before we get into these topics, however, if you're new to the channel and you're enjoying this content, please consider subscribing below and hitting the bell notification to get notified of when I publish a video. And I'd also like to quickly call out and thank my channel patrons. I'll put your names up on the screen here. I've recently decided to shut down the Patreon account, but to those people who have supported me financially over there, I just wanted to say thanks a million. And I have now actually moved the channel membership over to YouTube, which is $5 AUD per month. And there should be a button below this video for anyone out there who'd like to also support the channel beyond the standard subscription. So, number 1, the settings. It should be noted that before I started this test, I did a warm-up on the indoor trainer using a Sufferfest workout called the Igniter. Now, the Igniter is designed by a highly regarded coach of pro cyclists and world champions, Neil Henderson, and it's been designed to open up the doors to your upper end physiological systems before you go deep. And it was the perfect warm-up for me to get ready for this 1-hour test. Now, I decided on the brick wall because it was outside for one. My office is super warm, so I wanted some cooler temperatures and also some fresh air for the 1 hour. Although, as you will see from this weather chart, it was actually still fairly warm with high humidity, and unfortunately the forecasted cloud cover didn't stay put, with the sun hitting my back shortly into the hour, making me heat up significantly, which we'll discuss shortly. Now, I decided not to use Zwift or anything similar to avoid the carrots that riding on a Zwift course can provide, leading to potential criticism to the end results. I also didn't use erg mode, which enables you to lock the power on the trainer, because I felt that could also be an unfavorable tool to disrupt what is almost an organic smart trainer experience. The 2 slight variables that were left in my favor were number 1 being outside versus in, and number 2, I played some music to help with the mental side, predominantly Metallica, Pearl Jam, and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Number 2, how did I find this test versus the outdoor test? Well, it was so much harder. A completely different level of toughness was required here, and my heart muscle will prove that point for us all very shortly. I'm going to list on the side of the screen why the trainer was so much harder, and I'll also link to an interesting article below from the guys at the Sufferfest on the topic of training indoors versus outdoors. Obviously, with outdoors, the resistance is coming from the road, not like how it comes directly from the drivetrain on the trainer, so the pulling effect on the trainer makes the feel so much more difficult. On the road, you have distractions, such as terrain, road undulations, lap counts, whatever it may be. On the trainer, outside of the music in my ear, there are no welcome distractions at all, which makes the mental side so much more challenging. On the road, you may also have undulations, so maybe some uphill components, and you can get out of the saddle and rock the bike from side to side, using the body to generate more power and also leverage the gravity of the road. On the trainer, this really isn't possible. Now, on the trainer, I felt like my only potential rhythm, something that I could sustain, was at a higher cadence, working the cardiovascular system to the extreme. Whereas on the road, I could gain rhythms at both a lower cadence and higher cadence due to road undulations and not having a drivetrain pulling at your legs, meaning I could tap into different physiological systems on the road to give either a rest during the 1 hour. Finally, and perhaps the biggest factor on the trainer, was despite being outside, there is simply no breeze. The speed of the bike when on road creates a cooling effect that helps regulate body temperatures, whereas on the trainer, with no winds and no breeze created by the speed of the bike, I heated up like I was being roasted in a pressure cooker. So that's a great segue into point number 3, which is my heart rate numbers, which were extreme. If we go into my training software, today's plan, and look at the max heart rate in the half Monty and also for the 1 hour test, you will see my max heart rate is 180 and 181 beats respectively. And if you asked me before this test started, what is my max heart rate? I would have told you 182, maybe 183. I appear to be in the portion of the population that is 220 minus your age. In fact, I cannot remember the last time I've seen my heart rate go over 183 beats. And that includes some of the hardest Glenvale A-grade windy day criteriums that I have ever raced. So what you're about to see blew my mind. In fact, I'm questioning the numbers. Now, I definitely made the error of going out of the blocks too hard. While I didn't do anything extreme, reflecting, I should have started 10 to 15 watts less than what I did. So my heart rate elevated to a level that was way too high, I'd say by pretty much the 10-minute mark. In fact, shortly after the 10-minute mark, I wondered if this test could go on, but I continued, and so did my heart rate drift. It drifted to 188 beats. My average for this almost 1 hour was 178 beats, and my new lactate threshold heart rate, which is pinpointed where the blood lactate concentration begins to increase rapidly, according to today's plan, was 183 beats. The level I thought was my absolute max. How could this be, I pondered, until I reached out to a sports doctor here on the Sunshine Coast over a brief WhatsApp discussion, and he indicated that it was feasible for this to occur due to a number of factors, including fatigue, caffeine, overtraining, overreaching, and heat. While I had a black coffee before this test started, as I did with the full 1 hour test outdoors, I don't think caffeine was it, nor overtraining, as I haven't really been doing much training in recent times. I definitely feel fatigue may have played a small part, as I was still tired from last week's 1 hour, given the fact it was a slight shock to the system, but mostly I think this comes down to heat and overreaching. Two factors that have blown my heart muscle into new territory. It's actually amazing me that this could even be possible. And to be 100% upfront with you, I haven't felt my normal self since the test. So as a road cycling coach, I just want to say, I do definitely not recommend completing this test. Although I do believe you should get your FTP through the means of a test like the Half Monty. And if you want more details on training with power and using your zones, I have a free video training, which I'll link to below. So the fourth and final point here is comparing data. Now, in addition to the trainer dropping out after a huge spike in power, which makes no sense, and the connectivity of the trainer did appear to come back according to this graph, but I don't recall that. As you'll see at the end of this test, my cadence goes to around 130 to try and maintain power to finish the test off. I did accidentally pause the Wahoo app that records the data during the test for 3 minutes. Initially, this was from sweat dripping onto my iPhone screen at some point during, but then I'm fairly confident I knocked it again during, although things are a fair blur. Thus, a major mistake that I made during this test was not to have somewhere external to my towels where I could put the iPhone. While I did look for a small table or something pre-test, nothing seemed to be the perfect height, so I just stuck with the towel option. And what I noticed when placing the iPhone into the towels was slight dropouts were occurring, potentially with the material of the towel disrupting the Bluetooth signal, in addition to my flying sweat landing on the screen. Hence, why I held my phone for a fair portion of this test, and unfortunately, it left us without a definitive comparison between the Kickr power and the Quark. However, looking at both during and assessing the data available, there appeared to be a clear 10 watt difference, almost exactly between the Kickr and the Quark. While the Kickr is about 5 years older than the Quark, it does make sense for the power that is read directly from the crank to read a little higher than the power that is delivered from a section of the drivetrain. Now, if we look at the actual riding time, before the trainer dropped out, with just over 2 minutes to go, you will see my average power reading was 344 watts from the Quark power meter. Now, I'm going to say that if I was able to finish the test properly, I could have lifted that number just like how I did with the outside test, but we'll keep it conservative and round it to 345 watts indoors, which means we have the half Monty FTP at 350 watts from the Kickr and 168 beats for my lactate threshold heart rate. For the 1 hour test outside, we have 363 watts from the Quark and 170 beats for my lactate threshold heart rate. And for the 1 hour test on the trainer, rounding things to 345 watts using the Quark, 335 watts using the Kickr, with the ridiculous lactate threshold heart rate of 183 beats. So, in summary, out of these three tests, the 1 hour test on the trainer was by far the worst, hardest, horrible, never do it. Heat, overreaching, and a much tougher mental side made this the worst experience of my life. One that's made me even question my heart rate reading. If you've enjoyed this video today, I'd really appreciate if you could give it a like, and I'll catch everyone in the next video.